All right, so the Great Awakening, and we're going to throw in some Enlightenment here and some other sort of wrap up concepts. The Great Awakening is a religious movement born out of the feeling that religious piety had declined in society in the New World. This is a second generation concern. So when the Great Awakening happens, those first Puritans that had come to the New World in search of a pure form of Protestantism, these are their children, right? So this is this feeling that, okay, our forefathers brought us to this land so that we could be more pious, and we're not being more pious. So this is a call to a greater awakening of religious piety. As a community, moved further west in New England, they were also becoming more and more disconnected from these sort of very insular Puritan communities. So if you lived on a farm that was way outside of town, how then were you connected to the religious concerns of that Puritan community? Are you still going to church in the same way? Does church still have the same sort of power over these far-flung communities as it used to? There are also some fears and concerns about scientific advancements, new technologies. Would this weaken religious piety? These are sort of questions that they're seeking to answer. You have a group of preachers called the Jeremiahs. Think about Jeremiah from the Bible. They're warning that there's going to be fallout of biblical proportions based on the current lack of piety in the community. These are preachers with names like Jonathan Edwards, right, and George Whitefield. So the First Great Awakening is going to begin in 1730. It's going to peak in the 1740s. It's the only Great Awakening that we're talking about in this unit, but there will be another Great Awakening later on. Other colonies are also experiencing a rise of religious piety. It's not just the Puritans. Women are super attracted to this Great Awakening movement, and third or fourth sons are also attracted to the religious revival. And I think that we can answer this question as to why is because there's a feeling here that there might be some power to be had, that women could look at those in charge and say, listen to me, I have an idea here, that we might be able to do things different or better. Preachers advertised a fresh start through religion. It also attracts religious leaders who come from England. John and Charles Wesley, for example, the founders of Methodism, the Methodist Church. George Whitefield is an open air preacher, so think about like setting up a big tent and going to hear a revival. He is from England, and he attracts massive crowds throughout the colonies. Jonathan Edwards, man, both of these guys look like they're just judging the stew out of you, is a New Englander, so he's a homegrown guy. He is a Congregationalist. Think about a Baptist, an early Baptist. He had a firm belief in the absolute sovereignty of God, predestination, that salvation was through God's grace alone, and he was terrifying. Remember Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God from English class? Terrifyingly vivid descriptions of hell. He also exemplifies this sort of old light versus new light preacher, the old-fashioned way of church versus Jonathan Edwards as a new light preacher. Evangelical colleges, schools start to pop up to create more of these new light ministers. I want to also say something about the Enlightenment. That's John Locke up there in that really beautiful gray flowing hair. And I really firmly believe what this little image says up here. The Enlightenment's influence on 18th century America should not be underestimated. These ideas that John Locke and others are bringing in this Enlightenment period are having a great impact on leaders in the New World. There is an increased interest in education. There's an increased interest in politics. Do natural laws govern the world? It's not just religious faith that is coming into play here. What does lead to human progress? We're going to place greater value on scientific advancements. Even a well-known preacher named Cotton Mather is eventually going to recommend the smallpox vaccine. You have European Enlightenment thinkers that we know, like Francis Bacon, John Locke, and Rene Descartes, but also American Enlightenment thinkers, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison. In general, colonial law and politics is going to be an English tradition. It is illegal in England to print anything disparaging about a public official. And you do start to see over time in the case that's listed here as an example of John Peter Zenger, you start to see colonial laws begin to differ from laws in England. And it's this little bit of daylight, this little bit of separation in terms of law and politics in the New World versus law and politics in England that we will be coming back to when it comes to the beginning of revolutionary thinking. Again, I'm not going to read this to you, but there's some information here about difference in education and medicine, and also medicine in the colonies versus England. It talks about universities like Harvard, William and Mary, Yale, and Princeton, all founded to teach the ministry. And additional things that you must know. So if you have not gotten these things from your reading, you have to go back and figure them out. Oh my gosh. Okay, who were the New England dissenters, and in what way did they shift from Puritan views? Who's Roger Williams? Make sure you know who he is. Shh, buddy, I'm almost done. Make sure you know who Anne Hutchinson is, William Penn, and Thomas Hooker. Make sure that you understand and can answer the question, how did the English aid the Dutch in expanding? And how were their methods similar? Make sure that you can explain the ideas of the Quakers. And make sure you know what the Act of Toleration was. Why did the Carolinas split? How was Georgia a social experiment, and was that social experiment a success? And make sure that you know the origins of African slavery, and also make sure you know what mercantilism is. Thank you guys for being patient, especially with my background noise today. Email me with questions.